Here we go. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Good morning. This month, we are continuing our celebration of Hispanic Heritage Month, and we are happy to feature Brittany Pomales. I'm going to pass over the introduction to Karen, and then I'll start the interview after that.
Okay. Oh, somebody's coming in.
Okay.
Fantastic. Okay. So I'm going to read the SCBWI E&I statement. So as a reminder, SCBWI has a policy of supporting diversity and inclusion. This is a place we set aside for Kidlit creators and translators to meet, exchange ideas, and support one another in our efforts to bring great books to all children. Part of the reason we do this is so that they can see themselves and others reflected in their lives. We specifically focus on the art, craft, and business of publishing and try to keep on topic so everyone gets the most value from our time together. If you have any questions about this, please see the anti-harassment policy posted on the SCBWI website. Thank you. We are so excited to have picture book author Brittany Pomales in honor of Hispanic Heritage Month. Brittany is Cuban American and the author of It Started with a P. When she isn't writing books, Brittany is often playing with, singing to, or reading to her kids along with her husband and dog in their Arizona home. Welcome to E&I, Brittany.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to chat.
So let's jump right into it. My first question is, would you please tell us about your journey to publication?
Yeah, absolutely. It took about 5 years from me being interested in writing children's books seriously to getting to agented and book deal, and agented and book deal section is pretty close together. So a lot of that 5 years was trying to learn the craft and trying to query. It's seems easier than it is when you think of writing a picture book, because it's only anywhere between 500 words to 1,000 depending on what genre you're writing, but it's definitely hard. And also when you're trying to find your genre, so I started writing more emotional led stories, so SEL, social emotional learning, but they weren't exactly connecting, and it turns out that I am better off in the humor space. So when I was starting to write humor, then I started to see they sort of say you get hints that you're getting closer and closer, because you'll either start getting yeses in certain places, like maybe winning in online contests or things like that. So I had tried for the PB chat mentorship a few years. In the first year, as I mentioned, I tried with social emotional learning and didn't get it. And I was learning and trying different genres as I went. And on the third year, I had tried submitting humor, and I got accepted in the mentorship with Dev Petty, and we worked on my humor from there. And the story that we worked on together is It Started with a P. So directly from that mentorship, we it ended up becoming a book. So that's fantastic. After that mentorship, which was nice because it's when you take a class, it's general information, and sometimes there's a disconnect between that information and how to apply it when you're actually sitting down and writing or revising. So it was nice having someone there kind of helping bridge that gap, and it made a huge difference. So if you can potentially ever get mentorship in some way or shape or form, it is definitely very helpful. But I know it's not possible for everyone. And after that, so now we're looking at 2021 when I did that mentorship, and I had already tried for 3 years. Um, and I had been sort of reading a little bit on my own a year before that. So we're about 4 years into my journey, and then querying that story got some attention in the showcase but didn't get an agent there. In 2022, I connected with my agent, and actually in our chapter, Harshitha was with Ladderbird Agency, so I queried them because um, I knew her from our chapter. So I was like, okay, well, let me try and see if her agency works out. And I got interest from Stephanie Molina, who actually now just switched agencies. So now we're with Looking Glass Media and Literacy and Media, something like that. Looking Glass is what I will probably refer to it as. But she was with Ladderbird, and she's brought her whole team over. So I think so. Me and Harshitha are on the same team. She does Leaping Ledoux in our chapter, and then now that's 2022 in June, July-ish, we signed the paperwork for agency, and then in October of that year, it started with a P sold. So we're looking at 5 years sort of total, a little bit of study on my own, so webinars that I can find, reading books on writing, being a member of SCBWI, and then that mentorship with PB Chat helped as well. And then from there, from getting the yes with PB Chat, the yeses sort of it helped align the rest of the way for me to get from writer to published author.
I'm sorry, you probably already said this, but could you clarify what PB chat is?
Oh, okay. I didn't. Yeah. It started off as a weekly chat on Twitter, which was
Okay.
nice because it was right around the time that I started to learn, because sometimes you don't know what questions to ask. And they were already sort of supplying information. So I didn't have to worry about knowing what questions to ask. And it evolved from a weekly chat to a free mentorship. It was a 3-month mentorship. It ran for, I want to say, maybe a total of 5 years. It is defunct now, but in its place, you'll see PB Rising Stars that has popped up and is a phenomenal mentorship. So if you don't know about it already, I definitely suggest applying for them when they come around every year. And so there's still an opportunity there, even though if it's not PB Chat. So PB Chat was a 3-month mentorship. You apply to it, and it was free. I was selected out of a large pool of people where the mentors read the story, and worked with her, one on one for 3 months, getting 3 manuscripts polished, because that's usually what you will submit to agents, right? So you want to try and get your submission package if that's where you're at in the journey, because you don't have to be there in that part of the journey to submit or to be selected as a mentor or mentee, sorry. Each mentor has different parameters of what they're looking for or where in the journey they're comfortable mentoring. So
Okay, thank you. Yeah. So before I move on to my next question, I wanted to show again, this is Brittany's book. It started with a P. And I was hoping to get it signed, but then I had to wrangle my boys when I bought it at the the book stop thing.
well, I'm sure
But
there'll be other opportunities. I'll be around the
yes,
valley.
yes. But anyway, I did read it and it is delightful and very humorous. But I'd like to hear you, if you would tell us about your book. And as this is Hispanic Heritage Month, we're curious about any particular themes related that come up in your work.
Yeah, fantastic. It started with a P. It's about a young king who, on the night before his birthday, has a dream that something starting with a P is going to ruin his birthday party, but he doesn't remember what it is. Sort of when we wake up and we're a little foggy about our dream, and he makes a rash decision that everything that starts with the letter P must go. So pizza, pinatas, and presents from the party, and then it escalates to pants and people, and it goes on further. And then he realizes that he may have misread his dream just a little bit when when deciding to get rid of everything. And that came a little bit from my own life, because I know that I can worry about certain thoughts or things. So sometimes you might get anxious about an event, and that can overcast your mood and things like that. So that's definitely a message to maybe take a second, pause, and not let worries sort of ruin the party in this case, or ruin X, Y, or Z in your life. And then the themes that we were talking, and this will touch on a later question. Um, when we were revising and things in the story originally, it's a big cast in the book. So you'll notice my main characters, but then there's always a lot of background characters because it's the whole kingdom and you see them. And the first pass of full color, that page or that cast of characters wasn't as diverse. And I'm had mentioned that I would like the cast to be a bit more diverse. I'm not saying that I'm the only reason why they are, because I know there's a lot of voices that worked on that book that I didn't see. So it's definitely possible that someone else had also raised that same concern at that point in time. So the nice, lovely, diverse cast that you see there is definitely, I would say, attributed to my, my eye and culture, and knowing that that's what my day to day in my life looks like, because I know that it is a bit more of a medieval, but it's sort of a medieval with a twist, because there's like submarines in there, and there's like an airplane, so it does not play by the rules of medieval by any way, shape, or form.
Right, right. Well, it's fairy tale-ish, so that makes sense. Um, all right, so I was wondering for our next question where you get your ideas and if you always plan to write picture books.
I For some of it, I try and mind my own. So I have especially my social emotional learning stories that I'm some of them I'm just now trying to go back and add that humor, right? Because the actual truth in there is still valid. It just needs to have the actual like my my actual writing voice in there. So a lot of them I grew up in New York City and I have one that I hope will someday see the light of day, and it's about going to do the laundry, and it kind of takes a fairy tale spin from there. So I do have ideas that come from my own childhood and life, and then it'd be nice because I have like this parade of women down the street, because if you're in New York and you're traveling to or in Brooklyn, New York, so you're going a couple of blocks away with your laundry, right? And you have to have it in a cart, and you have all this laundry, and it's like because you try and do it all at once, maybe once a week, you're not going to go often. And so sometimes you would try and also gather a friend because now you're going to be a couple of hours. So there's just when I was younger, I remember my grandmother trying to time her laundry with like some of the other ladies in our building so that they would have company when they went to the laundry. So I hope that that one comes out one day and gets funny. But so I mind some of my own ideas or some of my personality flaws, right? It started with a P is a personality flaw. If you think about like tantrums or overreacting, that on the bright side, I'm a little bit better about about containing now as an adult, but definitely as a child. I remember I once had a surprise party and I was not happy about it because I was just too overwhelmed with all the feelings of the surprise party. But that's what it is, right? It comes with all those worries and things like that. So,
That's
and
fair.
it
That's fair.
was um, for when I decided children's, I would say it was always picture books. I realized in my early adulthood that I don't write long stories well because my brain doesn't analyze all those specific details. Even when I'm reading, I filter out a good chunk of all the little details. So I can read a book in entirety and you can ask me the main character's hair color and I could not tell you because I will just create something in my own mind. I'm not dealing with what is actually that's not an important fact in my brain unless it's like they're getting unless it's like they were getting their redhead and it was important to the story or something. But I will ignore those details, which means that it's not good for writing a novel because you can't really process those same details throughout the story. And I had a hard time trying to fill out a novel when I was thinking that that was the route I would write. And so I was like, okay, well, let me try and learn to write properly. I wanted to know story elements and character arcs, but I didn't want to try and write a novel over and over and over again to perfect those items. So I was like, I'm going to try picture books. They're short. I can write over and over and over again without, spending years on a novel and then realize this is no good. I need to start again. And once I started and went down the route of picture books, I realized, well, this was it. It worked well with the way I write, the way I read, and as we can see, it really did because I was able to make it all the way through learning how to do character and world build and things like that. So for me, even now, because we hear a lot like picture books are tough to sell, and so sometimes people will branch out and try and write like middle grade or things that might feel adjacent to picture books and things, and it has worked out for some, and that's how they've secured their agent. They may have gotten a middle grade interest and then also write picture books, but for me I was very firm about only writing picture books, um, because I know that that's where my strength is. If if you tell me and to sit down and write a middle grade, I may never do so. I don't know if it'll ever happen. It'd be nice because I love that world. I do like reading it, but I know it doesn't work with my own strengths of writing. So definitely picture books, and I definitely was very clear about that. Like when querying and things, like I am a picture book text only author. And it'd be nice if someday I could expand to something else, like maybe board books or like early chapter books, but I don't think I'll quite go up from there to to longer things.
Hey, that's more than fair. If you know your own strengths, play to them. It has obviously worked out. So this is you kind of alluded to this in answering the last question, but with talking about growing up in New York City and the laundry and your plan for a future story involving, you know, a laundry visit. But is there anyone else or anything else that serves as an inspiration to you?
Yeah. I know that I grew up watching like Abbott and Costello with my dad, and that's where a lot of the humor came from is my childhood with my dad. Because my dad, I used to call him the exaggerator because he would create scenarios that were like exaggerated. So we would be maybe on the bus, riding home, and he would go, and what if like a hole just opened up and like swallowed the bus? And then like which is completely, bonkers from our normal bus ride and has never happened. But then we would just, go off of that. And that actually was like exercising, your humor writing muscle, which I didn't know at the time. So between Abbott and Costello and my dad have definitely influenced, and my dedication in the book is part to my dad and part to my husband. So because they're both like the funny people in my life, or the people that keep me funny, because like King Liam, it's sometimes easy to get into my own head about worries. There's a lot to worry about in adult life, just even paying bills and like doctor appointments, and all the seriousness of life can definitely weigh you down if you let it. And so it's always nice to have those people in your life that remind you to like, hey, you need balance, fun. You need to have fun too. Um, and then, so yeah, so my dad and watching Abbott Costello back then was definitely a huge inspiration for my current book, because you'll notice that witty banter back and forth between King Liam and Cedric, which is directly inspired by like Abbott and Costello stuff.
Yeah, I think it's interesting you bring that up because I don't know too much about Abbott and Costello personally, but I do know that there's a sense of rhythm to those old school routines. And I think you definitely captured that for your book, which is no small feat. So yeah, kudos.
Yeah, it's definitely an older style of humor that I feel like you don't see as much nowadays, because people aren't watching those things. You're now watching, if you're watching even if you watch a funny cartoon that's made for kids now, it is so much faster paced and a bit more overstimulating than they used to be way back. So it's interesting how if you are watching funny cartoons for kids now and are writing humor, versus if you're watching something like I Love Lucy and Abbott and Costello and writing humor, your humor is going to be just completely different because what you're absorbing is so different.
Right, right. Well, but it's a good thing, I think, right? Because it's been long enough now that maybe it's time to bring it back. I
I
know
think so.
my own kids could use a little slower pace sometimes. Um, all right. So, speaking of inspiration, what would you personally like to inspire in others?
Oh, it's for two different, right? Because there's the older people who are reading my book, meaning like the parents, the librarians, or even the authors, and then there are the kids who are reading the book, right? So I know that the adults reading the book are going, or at least this book specifically, are going to see um, maybe a little bit of themselves in it, where I said that adult life can get a little bit a little heavy right now, and so I'm hoping that they'll just get, and all my other humor books as well, is just that time to forget about some of that, because when you're reading with your child, and if you can just sort of let all that go and sort of laugh for a little bit, it helps. Like I just recently read Who Ate Steve, and I don't know if you guys have read it yet, but it's a phenomenal funny book it's published by Nosy Crow. But you yell at the bird Marcel who's trying to eat Steve the worm, and because you're sort of like yelling at the bird as the parent or as the adult, it kind of feels nice to like get some tension out, because you have like a reason to sort of yell at this bird. And now my daughter jumps in and yells at the bird too, and it's just so funny between us. But it's nice because if you are having a hard day, because raising toddlers, or like I said, adult life, it's nice to like forget it all in that moment and even release some of that tension while you're laughing together, or in this case, yelling at a bird in a book. So that's kind of the goal for the parents when I write humor, right? Is I want them to be able to have those story time moments, and sort of an escapism, because when I was younger, that's what I used books for, right? When I was 9, 10 years old, is I like to escape in books. So I still have that same quality. It's just in picture books, helping the adult escape when they're, when they're sort of reading to their kids there. And then for the kids, I try and use um, there's like I try and have a cleverness to my humor so that there are multiple layers and it can be enjoyed by many different ages. So the younger kids who don't get much of what's going on, there's a lot in the images, and then the P's in the book throughout make it fun to just hear because you're just hearing the adult saying a lot of P's as they're reading. So they're still engaged even if they're not quite getting everything that's going on. And it's clever enough that even your 8, 9-year-olds are still engaged. Because I know I've read at a few story times and I've seen even like the older kids like leaning in, and I'm like, yes. So when I write, I try and make it worth the 1995, or I think mine is 1899, but books have moved up in price. So I've seen the newer books coming out being 1999 and know that realistically my next picture book would be 1999. So as a mom, I know how much that is. If you're buying 5 books, you're already at $100. So my goal is to definitely make it something that kids are reading again and again. So that is worth that 1999.
Yeah, I think that's very nice. It's very kind of you.
Like I said, hey, I feel the purse strings on my side. So I'm like, if I'm asking someone to spend that much money on something that I helped create, the least I can do is make it worth it.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right, so I've got another big one, like our first question, sort of jumping topics. Have you had challenges writing or publishing as a Cuban American? And if so, how did you overcome them?
I've been pretty fortunate because I know a lot or I've heard, because I don't know all of them, but I know some of them, and then I've heard from some others that it can be hard to lead with humor when you are of a diverse culture, because a lot of times they will want you to lean into that culture more and tell those stories instead, or focus somewhere that may not be where you want to focus. Not saying that you can't have those two, but there's a difference between having those two and only having those, right? So I know that when I first started and was going down the route of social emotional learning stories, I know that I had one story that I wanted to write, and then I heard that it was kind of like the slice of life, right? There was like, oh, well, there's, you don't have all this other, like the try and fail, and the slice of, like, I was deterred away from the slice of life story,
Okay.
which I've read many slice of life stories that I absolutely adore. So I as someone who was new and could have been a bit more impressionable, um, I feel like that wouldn't have been fair, because if slice of life stories is the stories that I should have been writing, then I would have had someone that just completely blocked that out. Fortunately, humor was a better path for me, but that's still something I had experienced and could have been a deterrent. Fortunately, just I found a different path that worked better out for me. And then also when you are writing, you know, humor, like it depends on like this book specifically. It didn't exactly matter culturally as strongly as some, because it's humor, so I didn't have to deal with too much on that end as well. So I think the biggest part of it is when it can like pigeonhole you sometimes, if that becomes what other people only see you as. But then again, that's a them problem, right? That's how they're seeing things problem. So if you ever run into those issues, then I would say that you need to switch people. Switch the people that you're around, so that you can continue to figure it out for yourself, right? I don't want someone else who's going to tell me, deter from slice of life stories. No, I want to figure it out myself. Like, not saying that you can't give me valid, like it's valid, but that wasn't exactly valid. Picture books are a hard sell no matter what genre you're writing. I hear constantly that nonfiction bios are hard to write, and they still publish them all the time, right? Humor is subjective; it's hard to sell. They publish it all the time. So I think that we, not we as in me, or not the whole group, but there is a certain percentage of the writing community that likes to scare other people out of something because it's hard.
Mm.
Like everything in life is hard, right? Like I could, or maybe, I mean, yeah, some people might have it easier go, but for a good percentage of us, we've done hard things. We can do hard things. So don't deter me because it's hard. It's, it's just, I don't know, silly. You need people that are
Yeah,
going to boost you up even when it's hard, not deter you when it's hard.
yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. I know you had mentioned, yeah, something about picture books being hard and humor is subjective, but I feel like I hear about that in every other age category too. Middle grade is hard to break into, young adults is hard to break into. I think, like you said, to your point, it's just hard. So,
Yeah. And I mean,
so
and everything is, it's just sometimes there's a little bit more mystery in picture books. But let's say you're going to like become a doctor, right? You go to school and the path might be a little bit more straightforward because you have to pass all these things before getting there, but it's still hard. It's still hard to go through all that to become a doctor. Not so no matter what field you choose, other than like, if you were just working sort of in and that might be it. The bigger jobs we see are things like customer service and things like that that may not take those years of training, but those bigger careers, which being an author is that, right? It is that bigger career that's longer than just publishing one book. It's hard because all building of careers are hard. I think we just may have gotten used to not being hard. Being a lawyer, that's hard, right? Becoming a lawyer, that's hard. And so is publishing a book, but it's attainable. It's attainable.
right, yes, 100% agree. Awesome. So sticking with the theme of diversity, I was wondering what resources or techniques you use when you write about diverse characters, especially those who are different from you, if you've encountered this.
Sometimes, like I know if you're writing Spanish, like using actual Spanish words, sometimes across different cultures that utilize Spanish, words can have a different meaning
Mm.
in a like very big way.
Yeah.
So I don't now, but I did have a few stories that have Spanish, and I've critiqued others who have words that do Spanish. And I know in that case specifically, it's very nice to have different Spanish speakers of different cultures read your story just to see how it's being perceived. Um, because I know even like so recently there was a big problem with a Disney cartoon that involved Spanish cultures and things, and they specifically called out the nickname that one of the cousins had. And the reason why they called it out is because in one culture it meant something bad. And I didn't go too deep into it because it's the internet. Why would I throw my opinion in there? But anyway, that was actually my nickname as a kid because in my culture it is not bad. And to hear all these people like complaining, yelling about it, and I'm like, well, let me not tell you that was my nickname, right? Like in the middle of the, because people like to fight, right? So I mean, I'm not going to add fuel to the fire, but it was just interesting. And then of course, like Disney stopped it and didn't have it out, and I think they may have eventually released some of it, but they had to sort of redo or chop things out or what have you. And that's just because Spanish amongst different cultures is different, but it doesn't mean it's technically not wrong in either in either culture. That's just how that word, is in that culture. Just like we have, slang for regular words where it starts as a normal word and it becomes something else. So but that's important when it's going to be printed in a book because you're going to get different Spanish speakers and you want to make sure that it's at least coming across the way it's intended. So definitely when writing in Spanish, I make sure that I sort of run it by some of my other friends who are, not Cuban American or not Puerto Rican because I'm also Puerto Rican as well. So maybe, some of my friends who are Dominican American just to see what they've, what how they perceive it and things like that. So definitely when writing things like that, it may not feel like a sensitivity read because I'm not worried about that aspect, but I am, worried about making sure that I'm not saying something incorrectly because it's the wrong word. The word is different. So
Yeah, no, that's a really good point that I don't think anyone has raised yet in the spotlights we've been doing. But it's it's great because yes, so Hispanic Heritage Month, obviously, it's a great celebration, but it does encompass a lot of different cultures. As we were chatting a little before the meeting, so you're Cuban American, I'm Mexican American, and I definitely know there are going to be a lot of commonalities, but also worlds of differences, which is great and good. But yeah, it's really good to keep that in mind that it's all not just one rigid monolith of, some sort of culture that combines everything under the sun. So that's a really good point. I'm really glad you brought that up. And you also answered my next question about sensitivity readers. So thank you. I feel like that covers it. All right, so I want to circle back to you being a picture book author in particular, as I believe we've only so far in my like one-ish year of leading the E&I group, we've interviewed one other picture book author, I believe. And I don't write picture book myself, so I don't know a whole lot about the process and everything. So I was curious, as a picture book author, you had said that you're text only, so obviously someone else illustrated. I'm looking, Andrew Joyner,
Yeah.
and you had already touched about how you sort of worked in diversity at a later pass with the illustrations. But I was just wondering how that process in general works, how you uh, collaborate with the illustrator, and are there techniques or ways you ensure the illustrations are diverse, if you would?
I think it may depend because I know that I've heard different stages that people are involved and how involved they are. I know that in some smaller, like maybe a middle size publisher, you might have a little bit more uh, time to put into that versus I know the bigger publishers may not offer that same amount of attention to getting your opinion on certain things at the other stages. So I received initial sketches like of what my character of what the characters would look like, and I had mentioned there as well originally. These are sketches, right? So nothing's in sold. So he was just a little bit lighter skin tone even from there, just because it was just a little bit heavier on the medieval when it was originally sketched, and I wanted it to be just a little bit more. Um, I can't remember what color I had said, a little bit more beige or a little bit more pink. I can't exactly remember, but so the main character I had asked if his skin tone could be a little bit different as well. Mind you, these were just sketches. They never said that that was going to be the color, right? It was just trying to figure it out. But I felt like that was a great place to put it just in case, right? Before things get solidified, I had mentioned, oh, is it possible to just, you know, I know it's medieval, but I'm thinking just a little bit more like less pale, I guess you could say, right? Just for the actual flesh, you know, not so much the where you start to get into to anything else. Um, and so that was altered just a little bit, which I think because there's so much white on the page, it worked out well anyway, just even from that perspective. And then they did black and white sketches of the whole book. So at that point, you can't really see anything. Everything looked good. I don't think I had much input on there because Andrew did a wonderful job at like capturing all the chaos in the book and things like that. So there wasn't really much that I needed to add. So then he went into full color, and then when it came back to me, there was just a few things as far as world building. So with the P being such a big thing in the book, I created a very specific world where certain items have to leave. And originally, the king's cape was purple. So either the cape would have to leave, right? Like he'd have to remove it somewhere throughout the book, or we'd have to change the color, right? So in order to make it easier on the illustration behalf and not give him another item to keep track of, just change the color was the easier option. So now he's got a red cape. And then Cedric's underwear, when he loses his pants, had polka dots on it. So it couldn't be polka dots because the underwear needed to stay. So then it got changed to hearts now in the final product. So little things like that were communicated back and forth. And I went mostly through like my editor. I gave everything to my editor, and then she passed it along because a lot of the notes were pretty straightforward. It didn't really have to kind of go into detail. So same thing with when I had mentioned the diversity of the cast in the background. I felt super comfortable just telling my editor and said, "Hey, is there any way we can get that cast to be a little bit more diverse?" That's literally that was it. That was it. No into huge detail, no nothing else. Like, "Hey, I noticed this. Is it possible we can do that?" She was like, "Great, I'll forward this over to Andrew." Did so. Or it may have gone to the art director first and then to Andrew. I'm not exactly sure their internal arc there with emails. Um, and then we got another pass where it's the final colors that you're seeing now. So, uh, but you may not feel comfortable asking that question. And if so, that's where your agent, if you have one, comes into play, because you can absolutely tell your agent your concern and your agent can raise it so that you're not sort of the one bringing, having to say it, or if you don't know how to word it, right, it might not be the most comfortable for you to say. So if so, that's where your agent comes. And I CC'd my agent on everything, but fortunately I didn't really need her to take those from me because I felt comfortable with my editor to say those things. But of course, it depends. You might end up in a relationship where it doesn't feel that open. So speaking of, shout out to my editor Claire, she was fantastic to work with. So yeah, so illustrations, I didn't have very much input other than once it was in, it was just sort of just little tweaks that needed to stay within the story working for the most part. But I've heard some people that are a lot more collaborative. Like for example, if me and Andrew work together again on a sequel, like maybe we'd have a little bit more communication because now we've sort of been there before. Like I might even include less art notes in a sequel because I kind of can see what he can add already. Um, so I think it would definitely depend across the board how much interaction you have with your illustrator, depending on if you've worked with them before, um, depending on how the size of the publisher and what they're allowed. Because I know someone who got a character design survey from like a middle-sized publisher, and so they were able to put in what they were thinking that their character might look like, right? Nothing's solidified, but might look like. And that was very interesting to me because I didn't have that opportunity, but I was like, that's pretty cool. And that's kind of cool. But I don't know that I'd be able to have imagined him better though. So sometimes it's a pro and a con, right? Like I don't want to um sometimes it's better off to have that illustrator be able to work their own magic, assuming that you like their work, right? You like the work that they've done. So
Can I ask a
Right.
question? Oh, can I
sure.
ask a question? You mentioned like putting art notes in your manuscript. Is that something picture book authors normally do?
Yes, I'd say for a good percentage. So sometimes your text isn't clear of what is going on in the image, and humor more so because there are visual gags that aren't in my text. And also I was trying to convey the amount of chaos I was hoping for in the backgrounds. But in a good chunk of time, the editor may strip out those art notes before it goes to the illustrator. So the reason why those art notes are there is specifically to make it clear to an agent or editor who is not having those visuals in front of them. It's not specifically to tell my illustrator exactly what to draw. So when doing that, that's kind of where when your picture book text only writers can be deterred from using art notes by some people. And really what it is, it's trying to use them effectively. And the goal is always clarity, right? So we always just want to make sure that the scene is clear, and that's where critique partners can help you because they can either pinpoint when something isn't clear or if something's clear enough that you don't need the art note. And it is always a suggestion, and it should never be like the rule. The reason why is because the illustrator will 99% of the time add to the book, right? Andrew's humor is part of the book. It isn't all me, right? Like when they're leaving in paddle boats and he has everybody in a big boat, but then he also has them in the duck paddle boat, which is his own humor, right? He inserted that. And I remember looking at the first sketches, and when I saw the duck paddle boat, I just started laughing out loud. And I was at like a work thing, so then I had to like put them away, and I was like, I'll have to look at the rest
That's
later because I'm gonna, yeah. So there's,
right there. Can you see it?
Oh, that's cute.
There's a little dog paddle boat, and that's right. That's him bringing in his own humor. And if I was very rigid about what I had envisioned for different scenes, I can tell you right now, it would not have been as good as the book came out. And that's where you'll see where some people may be starting out, and especially if you're very close to the story idea, you might be a little too rigid with your illustrations, and it might come out in your notes. But I promise you, it is definitely worth trusting the process. And there's also opportunities to bring those concerns later, right? So if there's a specific reason why you wanted something in there, like I know my friend who worked on Wildflowers Grow Here, there were specific like Easter eggs to like her and her culture and her heritage, and those are things she worked with her illustrator after, right? It wasn't like in the main manuscript where she was like, these specific items need to be there to tie it in, right? That was something they worked with after. So it's kind of nice that if you do still have like a certain request or something that you want in there, that is an open conversation that you can have like after you have your team in place.
Awesome.
That's
Thank you
cool.
so much
Thanks.
for, yeah, clarifying that. I find it all fascinating. Um, I was also going to say, I feel like what you said, with not having, when you spoke about how you uh, had trouble writing longer manuscripts when you first started writing and you didn't focus on the details. I feel like that also tracks with how you ended up working with your illustrator. So it works out on several levels. Very cool. Um, all right. So
And I'm actually just gonna rephrase the title. I
yeah,
misread the title. It's Where Wildflowers Grow. It's by
sure.
Dinh and illustrated by, I'm probably gonna mess up that last name. I'm sorry, Bao Lu. But it's Where Wildflowers Grow. I know I had said the wrong title, so
Thank you. I will make a note. Okay. So I wanted to ask how you balance your writing with the other challenges in your life. For example, day jobs, parenthood, what have you.
it is very, very difficult. But I was fortunate that before I had started writing before children, so I was able to sort of gather a bank of ideas because now that it's harder to write, it's easier to edit. And I'm just trying to work in that season. Like I know that writing is hard, so I've pivoted to things that I can do in this time frame and still be productive. And for me, that's editing things that I already have. And there will be a time where I'll have the ability to grow my bank again and then go on from there. So if you're having trouble balancing writing during this time, maybe check and see if there's something else that you can do that's not exactly sitting for an hour and trying to get into that creative world, because sometimes by the time you get into that creative world, you have to come out because your kids need a snack, right? So, but at least edits, you can sort of make tweaks and be a little bit more productive in that hour and thing. Especially if you're writing picture books, you can edit a lot more in that hour than sitting down and writing. Um, or then, tools as well. Like I use Google Docs because I can transfer between my computer and my laptop and my phone. So sometimes if I do have a deadline, usually self-imposed, but like right now I'm trying to revise. I have a revise and resubmit, and I'm trying to work on it for an editor. And so I know that even though there's no time limit on it, I don't want to wait forever for me, because if it's a potential sale, then that's great. Like I want to know that I want to get to that point in this process. So I am working on it. I printed out a copy so that I was working on that during TV time, because I had just a paper that I can not disturb the TV time with the light of my phone or computer or something. So I was just working on paper, and then the actual changes at nighttime, right after bed, or the kids, because I put them to bed. I then just quickly input one or two of those edits that I had on my phone, because I wasn't going to sit down at my desk. It was like literally in between like putting them to bed and getting myself to bed, right? So I was like, okay, I already worked on these, two lines I wanted to rewrite on the paper copy. Let me just quickly input it from my phone so that it's sort of done, and that was already transferring from multiple different devices or ways of getting things done. So sometimes it's sort of working finding what works for you and in those pockets, because sometimes it might be paper and pen, but if I have paper and pen without the TV time, my daughter will yank the pen out of my hand. So most of the time, paper and pen, um, might not work for you depending on the age of your kids and things. So
Yeah, I think that's great advice, finding what works for you in pockets of time. Um, So, in the interest, speaking of time, I know we have about 10 minutes left, and I know you have a hard stop at 10. So, my next question was going to be about advice for authors who are, just getting started, but I feel like you kind of covered that already, talking about how all writing is hard and the different pathways and techniques. So I'm going to skip that. And I'm just going to that's the last question, and then if we have time, we'll get to questions from people. But I was going to ask last, what is your current project or what's next for you?
sure. I have some things out of submission. I sort of hinted at my R&R that I'm working on, and it's actually for it's it's a board book, but it might end up being like a lower end picture book. It's geared a little bit more towards your 3 and 4 years old. And picture book can be, board book can be 0 to 3, picture book can be 4 to 8, but there's that wiggle room of you can have a lower end picture book, something that's really meant for those 4, 5, 6, doesn't go all the way to 8. So I'm not exactly sure where it'll land, just because it really depends on which editor prefers it and and things. But it I have 2 versions of it essentially. I have a sort of a picture booky version and a board book version of the same story. Sort of keeping track. So, fingers crossed there, because an R&R just means that an editor asked me to revise a few items on it and then send it back for further consideration. But consideration is not a guarantee. So we will see, and fingers crossed will be there, because it'd be nice to get especially if it's a board book, 'cause that'd be my first board book, and that'd be nice. My kids are both 0 to 3. My daughter's about to turn 3 at the end of this month, and my son is 9 months old. So it'll be I've been reading a lot of board books, so that's sort of why. It'd be interesting to see if I get that going as a board book, and if it's as a picture book, that'd be fine too, right? That's picture books is where I normally live, so hopefully that's what's next for me. So fingers crossed, and then I have a fun board book going out on submission soon. It's actually about the New Year's, like sort of a standard New Year, not specifically to culture, just the American New Year, I guess you can say, um, because it's normally seen as an adult holiday, right? Because staying up till 12, and I feel like I want kids to be able to enjoy the day too. So I really want, because I grew up in New York, as I had mentioned, so I really love um, New Year's with the Times Square ball dropping, and it's a bigger deal, I think, if you're in New York, and then throughout the rest of the world, or the rest of the United States, it's not as big for kids, and I want them to be able to enjoy New Year's Eve too. So my son's birthday is the day before New Year's Eve, so I think that might be why,
Aw,
right? Something to help him make that holiday big too. So we'll see.
you go. Yeah. And another source of inspiration for you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
All right. So before we open to questions, just really quickly, I remembered, Karen, did you want to take a picture or do you guys mind?
Yes, I want to take a picture. Okay.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Here
Hi,
we
Claudia.
go. All right, everybody smile.
Cheese.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thanks, guys. Okay. So does anyone have questions for Brittany? I will open the floor now. We have about 10 minutes.
I have one, Susan. I was just wondering, are there any things you do? Like, do you have any tips for when it gets like a little discouraging, or you're just like, I don't know, having a tough time with like a book or an agent or anything? Like, is there anything that you found that was really helpful? For context, I'm in the query trenches right now, and I could
Yes.
use some advice.
No, it is tough. I remember, since I was in it for a few years, and then I would see people that got it faster, like a year or 2 years, and it was definitely easy to be like, like I'm happy for them, but I'm just still here waiting for my turn. So I definitely get it, and I promise it's worth the wait. But one thing that helped me, or maybe two things, is trying to find a yes somewhere else. And so that might look completely different. So sometimes that might look like just having somebody read it for a positivity pass, which just means they're telling you all the things they love about it, right? That's it. They're not telling you anything that you need to fix. They're just, because there are lots of things, but we're so used to our critique partners maybe saying one or two things that they liked and then like how to fix it, right? Because that's always our goal. Like, I want to fix this. But sometimes it's nice to just hear all the glowing things about what you're sending out. So as a reminder of like, okay, like it's not just me who loves this. It's definitely worth still sending it out. Like, I know it's subjective. Like, it's no's don't mean that this is not good, right? Because all the no's can definitely make you think that this item is not good, and that's usually not the case.
Oh.
Or it might look like submitting to, writing something else small that you submit to like a writing contest, or if you have the time, or like one of the little writing magazines, because a yes somewhere can sometimes mean the world. Like sometimes you're like, oh, like, oh, good. Like it's like there's some, the universe isn't broken. Like I wasn't just getting all this bad luck of no's. Like there are some yeses out there for me, right? It like rejuvenates that hope that there are yeses out there for you. So definitely, I would say try and maybe pivot and find a different yes. Maybe not specifically per se a more attainable yes, but the publishing yeses are very, very hard.
Okay, that's really helpful. I never thought about having someone do a positivity pass, so that's a really good idea.
Yeah,
That's
I
cool.
like that. Claudia?
Hi. Well, I have a resource for Mandy, but also a question for Brittany. So, Brittany, are you writing any bilingual books, picture book?
My my laundry one has some bilingual language in it. Um, it's not immediately on my list of something that's going out, so I don't know. So I don't
Okay.
know, but I would love to have that eventually. It's hard to know where things are gonna land.
Yeah, yeah.
Because even when writing, I wouldn't have even known that this would have been my first title. And there's other ones that we've gone out on submission for that I was absolutely thought would have sold and did not. So in the 3 years, we've sent out maybe 5 or 6, and those haven't sold. So it's very interesting to see what is bought and when, and it's
Mhm.
wild, but it would be so fantastic and so much fun. So I hope so. Fingers crossed.
I'll be keeping my eyes out on you. So I missed the introductions, but I'm a bilingual picture book writer and illustrator, and I'm published. And I run I co-host a podcast called Bilingual Book Buddies. And
Mm.
so we do a lot about bilingual picture
So
books.
do you know? Well, I mean, you may not know, but at least know of her, Gabby or Orozo Belt.
Yeah, actually,
Yeah.
yes. She's our next podcast comes out this Wednesday.
Yes, she is fantastic. I work with
Yeah.
her when I was mentioning about Spanish and the languages,
Mhm.
and I work with her, so I'm one of the people that she runs her stories by to make sure that the Spanish
Oh,
doesn't like mix up in translation in other
yeah,
cultures. So even
that's
though, and a lot
fabulous.
of her books, yeah, a lot of her books are she's got language in both. Por un ratito is, if she has it in English and Spanish, but her English version has Spanish words in it. So um yes, she's fantastic. So
Yeah, yeah, she was, I guess, in our podcast. Fabulous. And for Mandy, a resource, and this is actually a Brittany's resource. I'm just sharing it because I liked it. So, Brittany, I first saw you through PB Party because you did like a Zoom thing and so forth. But there was a query letter, and that was the query letter for this book, this P book, and they break it down into all these components. So since Mandy's in the querying trenches, that might be a fun resource to look at just to make sure that your query has everything perfect that it needs to have. So if you go to like PB Party, actually, if you don't mind, I can try to find the link and put it in here before the meeting is over.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Awesome. Melanie, did you want to ask or say something?
I wanted to ask, you talked a lot about, well, just in your conversation, things I know you learned a lot about craft before you started or as you were starting. And I also hear, and those things I recognize, but there are also a lot of words that you used about publishing, like the slice of life and the try fail. And I've heard of those, but do you have any suggestions about learning? Because have you just learned it all with your publishing experience, or did you learn some of that beforehand to help you get your picture book ready for publication? Not just good as a story, but good for this publishing market. Do you have any
That's a
advice?
fantastic question. Yes. So I know that reading a lot helps, right? Which sounds so silly, but it depends on how you're reading, right? So reading a lot of picture books within the past 5 years and then reading widely in that, not just what you're writing, helps you see those other types that we were talking about, right? So if I were to just read humor, because that's what I'm working on, then I would miss those slice of life stories and things like that. And a great example of a slice of life story is My Papi Has a Motorcycle, by Isabel, um, Quintero and Zeke Pena, if you haven't already read that one. So that's a great example. So then if you read it, you'll sort of already know, okay, this is, a solid slice of life story, and you'll be able to easier identify the other ones, which just basically means that you might also hear that it's a quieter story because there isn't really a conflict, and the goal is to share an experience. There isn't exactly a conflict there, but the experience is still worth sharing. So that's what slice of life is. And as you're writing, sometimes that's how you might figure something out, right? You have a story and you're like, okay, well, this isn't, your normal try fail. And try fail means that you have your character go through 3 or 4 scenarios where they are not succeeding, and then they succeed by the end of the book. So you're going along that journey with them to try fail, and then you're happy because they succeed at the end. And those are just only 2 types of structures. The try fail is probably the most common and the most widely taught, but then if you're writing something else, it could hinder your growth because what you're writing isn't fitting in that structure, and you're not getting help in the structure you're actually writing. So I would say, um, also seek out, like, if you follow, I like to follow different authors on social media and things like that, or their newsletter. And even then I would say go widely, right? So even if you're writing humor, for say, don't just follow or read newsletters from humor writers. You want to go more widely so you can kind of find out what other people are writing and maybe what resources they use or what has helped, or if they're teaching something, because SCBWI has fantastic different virtuals in different regions, but sometimes it might be hard to pin down what's happening in all these different regions. So I love when another friend will share something and I'm like, oh, I'm gonna pop into Illinois for their webinar or Illinois. So um yeah, I would definitely say reading and connecting with the community a bit more widely, if you have the bandwidth, of course, or if you know specifically, you're like, what, I want to learn more about this person's writing or this style of writing, then you can go directly down that path too. But
Right, excellent. Well, thank you so much.
yeah,
Well, we have hit 10 o'clock, so thank you for joining us, Brittany. This was very educational and a lot of fun, and I've got a lot of notes to write off and lots of things to think about. So thank you so much.
you're welcome. Thanks
Um,
for having me,
it was
everybody.
good to,
Thank
yeah, it
you.
was good to
Thank you,
see
Brittany.
you.
Bye.
Take care.
I'm gonna stop the recording.